Well, here at 1819 News, we do three things. We inform, we investigate, and we celebrate. We inform the people of Alabama about what's going on and why it matters. We investigate corruption. Alabama is one of the most politically corrupt states in the nation, so it is a target-rich environment. But we also celebrate the things that are good, true, and beautiful about the state. Today, we're going to go heavy on informing. We're going to be talking about something that you probably don't know much about that actually has a big effect on you. That's the Public Service Commission, or the PSC, as you might have heard it. We're bringing on Twinkle Cavanaugh, the president of the Public Service Commission, to talk about who she is, what the Public Service Commission is, and what they do. All that on 1819 News, the podcast. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. I'm Bryan Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, and host of this here podcast, where we're in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. With that, on that note, we have a great episode. I think it's going to be a very informative episode for the audience today. I'm bringing on the president of the Public Service Commission, Twinkle Cavanaugh, a very well-recognized name in Alabama politics, but I do believe that most people don't know what the Public Service Commission is or does, and it's actually very important. And so bringing her on, want to hear her story. How did she get into Alabama politics? And what does the Public Service Commission do? I think that's going to be really informative for you guys to begin to kind of understand just a little bit more. And the more you understand, the more you know. I think there's the star that goes by, the more you know. You guys remember that? Anyway, that'll be good. So want to welcome on Twinkle. Twinkle, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Bryan. I really appreciate it. And thank you to your news podcast. Love you getting the news out, the real news.
Yes.
And love listening.
Absolutely. So before we jump in, I always do promotion. So bear with me while I sell stuff to my audience. You ready?
Good deal.
Yeah. All right. So if you guys have not signed up to become a member of 1819 News, now is the time to do it. There's nobody else who's going out there beating the pavement, pressing the flesh, asking real questions about things that really matter to the people of Alabama, except the journalists that work for 1819 News. They're not rewriting press releases. They're not just going to AL.com and rewriting another, left story with a right spin. They're actually going and digging and finding out what's going on, whether it's Haitians being dumped into Sylacauga or, whatever it might be. We're the ones that are there actually reporting. And so we need your help as a citizen-supported news outlet to be the citizen in citizen-supported news. And so please go to the website, 1819news.com. There's a red button at the top that says Become a Member. Membership start as little as $5 a month. With that, you get access to special behind-the-scenes content. You get cool merch. We've got the greatest hats. I wish I could talk like Donald Trump, the greatest hats, but I don't have a very good Trump impression. But more than anything, you'll be supporting honest, independent journalism. And so please go do that. And now we will jump right in. So here we go. Twinkle Cavanaugh, tell us your story. Where were you born? Tell us a little bit about your parents. Where'd you grow up? All that kind of stuff. And then how'd you get in Alabama politics?
Well, I don't want to sound like Kamala Harris by any stretch.
Middle-class family?
No. That's how she starts out. I would say I had a fabulous family, a family that we didn't have a whole lot, but we did a whole lot together. We were always at church when the doors were open, and I had a great upbringing. I feel like Leave It to Beaver had nothing on me. I played outdoors until the street lights came on, and I came inside, and so life was great. I grew up, my parents were both from farming families in South Alabama. My mother is from the Bullock-Pike County line. My granddaddy was as I call it, a scrapper farmer, but he did cattle and soybean, peanuts, and cotton. And my other grandfather was from Crenshaw County. And he was a poultry farmer, and he owned a rolling store. But to give you a little bit about my family, my grandparents in Crenshaw County had outdoor plumbing until I was 4 years old, and my father went down and put the indoor plumbing in. Now, that might sound strange to some, but the reality is, if you're used to it, I was the child that said, why in the world do you want to get rid of going outside to the potty? That's fun. So, I come from just a normal family in South Alabama, and love my childhood. And so I don't have anything. There's no story or anything like that. But I will tell you a funny. It's probably not even appropriate these days to dress up, but you'll like this one. In fact, we were cleaning out the garage on early Saturday morning and unpacking some boxes that had been there a while. And my husband found my first grade picture. Of course, not the individual picture, the group picture. And I said, he was about ready to toss it. And I said, wait, that's a collector's item. I've got to keep it. And he said, why? And I said, well, I dressed up like an Indian for my group picture day, and I didn't tell my mom it was picture day, and I was so proud. I saved my 25-cent allowance until I raised $2.25. I bought the picture, and I gave it to my mother for her. I don't know if it was birthday or Mother's Day. They're both in May.
Yeah.
And so Tuesday, I guess I was gone, and I got home, and my husband said, wait, no one else in the class dressed up that day. I noticed the picture in our bedroom. And I said, no, they didn't. I said I had gotten it from the Sears and Roebuck catalog from Santa Claus at Christmas that year, and I was so proud to wear it. And that's when my husband said, you have always beat to a different drum. So there's, you got it.
Okay.
So there's a story in that, and that I think that's why I am comfortable being who I am. I'm comfortable telling the real story of what's happening in our state and in our country. And that's why I've always believed in the conservative causes. And I served as executive director of the Republican Party in Alabama. I served as the chairman of the Alabama Republican Party, and I have always worked in some form of conservative cause, whether it's lower taxes, less government, or working for different elected officials.
Awesome. So what years were you the chairperson? I don't know what the actual term. What's the actual term of a chairman? Is it chairwoman? Is it chairperson?
I was just the chairman. I was the first, so first female, and I just was called the chairman. But to be honest with you, I've always just been Twinkle. Yeah. So I don't know that anybody ever really called me chairman. I always say that's my mother-in-law, Miss Cavanaugh. So just call me Twinkle.
What so now more questions. So I want to ask what years you were the chairman, but then
05 to 07.
And where was that from Bill Armistead to Terry Lathan? Like
I was before both of them.
Before both of them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Wow. That is. Wow, that's pretty impressive.
A long time ago.
Yeah. So Twinkle.
It's my real name.
It's your real name. You probably get that a lot. Is that your real name? That's amazing.
That used to be, before you got to the state, Bryan, a lot of newspapers ran stories. I think they were trying to attack me by...
I get a lot of that myself.
By saying that I was using some strange nickname, but it's my real name. It's on my birth certificate, and I always tease if I knew how to sing, I could go to the Grand Ole Opry without a name change because my real name is Twinkle Faye. Yeah. Faye is my mom's name, and my parents, like I said, they were both from the country. They were both, they both got a degree in math, and they both taught school, so they moved to Montgomery to get a job. And my mom was teaching a little girl whose nickname was Twinkle. Her real name was Star. And my dad said, if we ever have a child, I'm naming him Twinkle. We teased my younger brother, thank goodness you weren't born first. A boy named Twinkle would really be hard.
That would be a Johnny Cash song.
You got it.
Boy named
Boy named Sue.
Twinkle. There it is. Well, that's really cool. I have always wondered since, when I first began paying attention to Alabama politics is right around the lieutenant governor's race where you and Will Ainsworth were facing off. And so that's kind of when I first started paying attention, and then obviously very heavily started paying attention when I started 1819. So always wondered what is the background with Twinkle. But that's really cool. Like your parents are country, Twinkle Faye. I mean, that's as Alabama as it gets.
I was born in the 60s, so I think most people think it's a radical 60s name. That could not be further than the truth. In my family, my parents were just from South Alabama. They thought it was the fanciest name they'd ever heard, and they were excited about getting to name me Twinkle. Wow. But it's not always easy. Like a boy named Sue, a girl named Twinkle has not always been easy. I think a lot of times people now think, it's a great political name. I'll tell you another quick story. I took a lot of beating for the name Twinkle, and they asked when I first decided to run, several people said, are you going to use your name or use a different name? I said, I've got to be me. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm using my name. And so there were several elections. I did not win. And so the first election I won, I went to a Farmers Federation big event in Montgomery and at the Renaissance, that big auditorium. And Karl Rove was the speaker. And he was congratulating all of the judicial candidates. And then he said, and you all have a one-name wonder. You don't even have to use their last name.
Yeah.
I tell you, Bryan, I was beaming because I thought, finally, it's not a bad radical
came
name.
in handy. Yes.
Came in handy.
That's
so
awesome.
anyway, there's my story.
That's really cool. So, Public Service Commission. So you've had a kind of a broad, before we jump into Public Service Commission, you talked a little bit. So you mentioned being kind of rugged individualism allows you to be yourself in politics. Is there anything else that kind of drove you into, because politics is a weird world to get into. It's like, so radio is my background. And they say you get the radio bug. And once you get the radio bug, it doesn't go away. Mine turned into a podcasting bug, but here we are.
Well, you're good.
We do have a radio show in 1819. But what gave you the political bug? What caused you to want to dive in as much as you have?
Well, if you really want to know the truth, I went to nursery school on Perry Street.
Yeah.
And that is where, for those of your listeners who don't know, is where the governor's mansion is located. Back then, you would my dad drove a truck. There was no back seat in a truck back then, so I would stand next to him in the car seat and in the seat. There were no car seats.
Yeah.
I'd have my arm around my dad's neck in the front seat, and he'd take me down to Perry Street to my nursery school. And we would pass the governor's mansion, and that was the biggest, fanciest house I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I would always ask, my dad said, about that house. I have vague memories.
Yeah.
And my dad said, well, maybe one day you can marry the governor. And I teasingly said, no, Daddy, maybe I want to be.
Yeah.
And that's always been a joke in my family.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and say, I'm not running for governor this time.
Yeah.
So I don't want that out there. But I say that to say, I think I've always had some kind of a bug for being able to serve people.
Yeah.
But what the real thing that drove me to the Public Service Commission, and like many of your listeners, when you said you probably don't even know what we do at the Alabama Public Service Commission, I was just like your listeners. But what I did know was that many times it was used as a slush fund for our then democratically led legislature. They would put a lot of money at the Public Service Commission and then go call on it, and we would pay their bills.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of excess money flowing through the agency. There was also a lot of, I call it travel abuse at the agency. When I got there, some of the things that I had heard were actually true. We had 119 employees and we had 59 cars. Now, what does that tell you? 1 out of every 2 employees at the commission was driving to and from work on your dollar.
Yeah.
And I knew that was wrong. But I was hearing all of these things as chairman of the party. I also worked in the governor's administration at the time. Then I went on to be chairman of the party. But I would see the bills coming through, and I thought, I don't know what they do, but we need to get over there and right-size the Public Service Commission. So I did a lot to try to find out what they did at the PSC at the time. They had a website, but it really didn't tell you anything. You could not even find out when their meetings were held.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult to get their phone number, and I was pretty connected, and yet it was very difficult. And so I thought somebody needs to get in there and clean it up. I ran for president of the commission. I did not win the first time. Like I said, it was not easy going in with a name like Twinkle. But I ran again, and I was successful. I ran for place 1 on the commission. 2 years after that, I defeated, at the time, our last remaining statewide Democrat, Lucy Baxley, and won president of the commission. And I will tell you, we have changed the commission a lot. Today, we do not have anywhere near that many cars. In fact, we're somewhere in the ballpark, besides the people that are inspectors and use them on a everyday basis. We've got 4 cars in a motor pool, and there are no excess cars. The only 2 cars that are driven every day that you don't check out are our inspectors.
Interesting. Okay. That's That's a lot. That's a lot to get done. So tell us specifically, the Public Service Commission exists to do X.
Well, we were created in the 1800s as the Railway Commission. Most states had a Railway Commission because at the time, if you were a legislator and you said, hey, that train is no longer going to stop in your small town, well, you probably were going to become a ghost town. Yeah. And so it was not real popular to have to make that decision. So they created in many states a Railroad Commission. And that was in the 1800s here. We still have those commissioners' pictures on the wall. But in somewhere along the 1930s, and there's no real history that I can find on that, it was changed to the Alabama Public Service Commission. We are even though we run statewide, we are a legislatively created body or agency, and whatever they put at the commission for us to regulate or inspect, that is what we do. So there's a lot of things that don't fit in a nice, neat pot that we do at the Public Service Commission. We regulate what probably we're most famous for is regulating Alabama Power Company, but we also regulate the gas companies. We also regulate some water, some wastewater. We regulate Uber and Lyft. We regulate moving companies in our state, also taxi cabs and things like that. The only real phone regulation we still do is, say, prison payphones. There's not a lot of...
Use those.
You do, but but there's not a lot of phone regulation anymore because everybody's got a cell phone in their hand now. We also do all gas pipeline inspections across the state. We inspect railroads, whether it's We don't do safety it is safety, but DOT is in charge of the crossings.
Sure.
But we do all track inspections and all equipment inspections for the railroads.
Okay.
And then we also do real-time insurance for 18-wheelers and large trucks.
If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be Bryan, Brian.Dawson, Dawson, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you. I think we interviewed John Merrill when he was the Secretary of State. We're like, so you just deal with voting, right? And he's like, well, actually, there's like 117 things that I deal with. And I'm just like, but again, that's the whole reason. It's like, what do these people do? Why do they exist? What is the purpose? And because it's interesting, and I think it's probably because there's a lack of understanding on what the Public Service Commission does. Something I've always noticed, all the rhetoric, I wouldn't even call it rhetoric, just political comms, be it the political ads that happen during the Public Service Commission or a lot of the communications on social media from public service commissioners. It's like you could be like, hey, we went and inspected a pipe today. It's like, well, is that going to go as far? So what you see is a lot of like extremely conservative rhetoric coming out of like the always totin' Jeremy Oden, right? Burned into my brain until the day I die, for sure. And it's like, well, what does he do? And so do you kind of see what I'm talking about? There's just seems like any of the communications that comes from that, it's more kind of over-the-top political rhetoric that's not necessarily connected to what you guys do.
Well, I know 4 years ago when I ran, my commercial said it was a picture of my tennis shoes. They really were my shoes.
Yeah.
And I said I laced up my tennis shoes and I went door to door for Donald Trump because Donald Trump is, tough on all of the issues that
Sure.
I'm tough on. And so the reality is you've got to draw a little bit of a line between what we do and who we are because
Correct.
we are quasi-judicial, and so we sit on the bench once a month and we make decisions for the state. And what I want to know about my judges is that they are, really hard-nosed conservatives, that they are not going to make law from the bench, but they're going to look at our Constitution and do what is right by the Constitution. And that's what you want to hear from a judge.
Yeah.
And from the Public Service Commission, what I want to know is that a commissioner is a conservative, that they think like me, that they think the radical ideas coming out of Washington that are driving up our oil and natural gas prices, the fact that they're fighting fossil fuels, that these things are absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
And I want to know that they're with President Trump on his energy ideas of drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
In fact, that was my first commercial
Yeah.
way back. But
Yeah.
is we need to drill. We need to be energy independent. We need to fight these people that are saying we need to do away with fossil fuels. And I have been a huge proponent. I fight, in fact, for coal, keeping Alabama coal burning in our state because it is so important. Those are jobs. Those are good coal mining jobs, but it's also a clean way. The left has skewed the way we think of fossil fuels, and it is wrong. So what I want people to know is I am a conservative through and through. I don't think anybody can get to the right of me on just about any issue. And that's what I want. When I hear somebody's making a decision for me and making a decision for my family, I want to know that they're thinking like me and that they are conservative.
Yeah. And I think that's great. And I want to go more into energy policy, fossil fuels, and all those other things. It was just one of those always peculiar things that I've noticed. And then the opposite of it, you're not necessarily responsible for this, but like some of the PACs and stuff, when they put out commercials against someone that they don't want to be on the Public Service Commission, it's like, it's a tree-hugging hippie, right? And they make him out to be a tree. It's like, I don't think he's really a tree, but again, politics is a contact sport, and so you have to communicate. And I do think that that's interesting. And I'm hearing why now. It's like, no, I didn't know there was a judicial aspect to the Public Service Commission. I didn't. So that actually makes sense. So that's good. Talk more about energy policy, fossil fuels, all those things, because I'll just kind of give you my take on it. There's we have so many resources here in the United States. When Trump was in office, we were energy independent. We have
oil was $42 a barrel.
Yes. And then coal, we have coal in Alabama, we have coal in America, and then we have coal companies that are here. And it works. Like, that's kind of my whole thing is like, it works. Like my power turns on, and there's places and there's ways that you can get energy that isn't the case. And it seems like they're wanting to go that direction rather than towards what we know works. And it actually isn't that bad for the environment if done right.
Absolutely, you're right. And when I speak around the state, I always ask people, how many of you checked about what the price of a barrel of oil is trading for today? Of course, there are very rarely any hands that pop up. Once in a while, you'll get a nerd like myself. Yeah. And I said, okay, well, let me tell you, it affects your everyday life. And then I'll go through did you get up this morning and use some shampoo or a bar of soap when you took a shower or a bath? Okay, don't answer. Just, think about it.
Yeah.
Did you put contacts in your eyes? Did you put plastic glasses, readers on this morning? Did you go in your kitchen and pour yourself a bowl of cereal or even milk, because the fertilizer for the cow's grass or the fertilizer for that corn or wheat that made the cereal, all of these things I'm talking about are a byproduct of oil. Then you had to get that to the market. The farmer had to get it to the market. We know we use oil when it comes to transportation. Sure. That's an easy one.
Yeah.
And then, did you get in your car and come to work this morning or come to this meeting today at lunch? That's what I'll always mention. And everybody's shaking their heads. And I'm like, okay, well, we want to know why is it that, and there are multiple reasons, but I believe this is a major reason. Why is it that our inflation is so high right now? And when you look at the fact that a barrel of oil under Donald Trump, when he left office, was trading at $42. Today, it's somewhere in the ballpark of $76. It went as high under the Harris Biden administration to $123. Okay, 42 to 123. Triple. But okay, even 42 and today at 76, you're almost double the price.
And it's only 76 because it's about to be an election.
That's got it. You got it. Well, you can look at our strategic oil reserves that is supposed to be, it was put in place in the 70s after, our terrible energy crisis. And we were supposed to use it for our security, our safety, not to keep gas prices artificially low so that they could, basically take away all the fossil fuels, take away the drilling.
Yeah.
And they'll come up with all sorts of ways to spin it, but this is the hard, cold facts. And so all of the things we do in life, whether it's our groceries, for ladies who wear makeup, I mean, you can go on and on about the things that are a byproduct of oil, but it affects everything we eat. All of our meats and all of our vegetables and our fruits, fertilizers, I mean, everything.
Yeah.
And getting it to market, the grocery store actually paying for all of their, power and everything. So everything is affected by that barrel of oil. And yet, the administration has had a war on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Now let's go on into electricity, because I think that is just an unbelievable poor, everything they do is poor policy.
Yeah.
But it is unbelievably poor policy right now in Washington. Donald Trump passed a tax cut, and those Democrats love to say it was for the rich. Well, let me explain something. With Alabama Power Company, the tax that all customers pay, because it is a tax put on by the feds on all corporations, is about 300 million. I always put the T instead of the M, 300 million a year. Okay, well, when that tax cut, was put forth under Donald Trump, that money all went back to the consumer.
Yeah.
Every dime of it, because we directed it, had to go back to the consumer.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? He cut the corporate taxes from 35 to 21. Now, he wants to take it even lower to 15. Now, what would that mean? Probably 150 million more savings to every customer.
Yeah.
That's huge. Now, what does Kamala want to do? It's crazy, but she wants to turn around and add to that. She wants to put that tax back on you. And the way she's going to do it is it expires in 2025. That was how Trump got it through the Congress, is to let it expire. Well, he's not going to let it expire, but she will.
Yeah.
And so voters need to know it will affect the price that you pay for everything, but especially electricity and gas, because those are taxes on your utilities that just come straight to you.
Sure. No, it's so much to think about, and you don't sit and think about all the different things that oil affects or all of that. So that's it's good to think about. Another thing I think is it's this weird tension that exists in the energy world. I think just from a press standpoint, Alabama Power, they come under fire a lot. They're the big power company. But at the end of the day, they provide a ton of jobs. They get power from point A to point B pretty reliably, comparatively speaking. But, they also come under fire for this thing or that thing or whatever. And I think one of the things that I often hear, the critiques I hear of the Public Service Commission is, hey, Alabama has some of the, respectively to other southeastern states, we have the highest power rates. We haven't had a rate audit in 20, I don't know what the years is, but this is what people hit me up about. And I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, let's talk about it.
Yeah, no, please. And so when was the last rate audit? And then what are our rates comparatively and why?
Well, first of all, when you hear that, they don't say rates. If you'll listen to them, they'll say bills.
Okay.
Alabamians have some of the highest bills in the nation, is what they want you to believe. Well, the reality is we use electricity in Alabama to both heat our homes and cool our homes.
Sure.
And if you look at most states, they use it to cool their homes. They don't use it to heat, because you use a heat pump to heat your home. So any climate that is goes below 32 degrees on a regular basis, like any Tennessee and north, a heat pump really doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
In Florida, they don't really need heat at all, so they're not using much heat at all. And so really there are very few states that are situated so that the environment makes sense for a heat pump.
Yeah.
Alabama happens to be one of them. We happen to hold a record of the most heat pumps of any state in the United States. Now, why is the question? Number one, where we sit geographically and our climate. It makes sense. But number two, the Alabama Supreme Court in a case said that the power company had to be allowed to advertise, because while they were regulated and the regulators were trying to take all the advertisement money away from them, they went to court, and the Alabama Supreme Court said, yes, they have to be able to advertise because all companies are allowed to advertise. Yeah. And so they actually at that time decided to strike an agreement with the commission. This is before I sat on the commission, that their shareholder would pay half of their advertising, and then they would pay, the consumer would pay for half in their rates. So, you pay for half in your rates, but that's what the court said they were allowed to do. They usually take that money and put it towards events in the community, advertising. Sure. However, many years ago, they advertised heat pumps, and they must have done a great job because we now hold the record most heat pumps. So if you look at an average bill and you're using your heat and your air with electricity, your bill is going to tend to be, because you use more, it's going to be higher than somebody that just uses it to air condition their home. Sure. That's also why in Alabama, with Alabama Power Company, they are what we call a winter peaking company. And this makes a huge difference. That means any given minute, if you were to graph it, the most or the maximum amount of power that is sold or used is on a very, very cold winter morning, not on a hot summer afternoon like most companies. Yeah. And so it really changes the dynamics of their company and what they need to be successful, to always be on for their consumers. Well, if the consumers are using the maximum amount from 5 to 7 or 5 to 6:30 on a freezing cold morning, solar doesn't make sense. Sure. Because there's no sun shining. And yet that's when they are having to ramp up every bit of power they have. Yeah. And so there are a lot of things when you're regulating a company you have to look at. There are different dynamics. And but let me also say they are below the national average in cost, and they are right at the Southeast average. Okay. And so if you look at the amount of power you use versus the cost, I think you'll see it's very comparable in the Southeast now. Actually, in Alabama, we are below the national average. But the amount used, that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, and you can't. Rate used is obviously that doesn't. It's how much are you charging me per whatever the unit of measure is that they sell. Right. Right. And so you're saying we're average for the Southeast. Right, that's where we're
below the national, and we're right at the Southeast average. Okay. Let me give you an example, though. When you talk about fuel, we're talking about how much the federal policies have affected us, how much the liberal, socialist, Marxist policies coming out of Washington, D.C. now affects your pocketbook when it comes to power or when it comes to your gas bill. It is really affecting you. But let's talk about that for 1 second. Right now in Alabama, we do still use coal, but we use a majority now, 40%, almost 50% actually, of our power is generated using natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. Natural gas under the Biden administration went from less than $2 per MMBTU up to almost $10, $9.98. That is a 5 times the price. What if you went to the pump and to fill up your car, instead of $2, it was $10. You probably would have to forego a lot of other things in your budget. Yeah. So the reality is that is what happened. Now, it has now come down. But at one point, because the cost of fuel is just a pass-through cost to the customer. They don't make a dime on it. Whatever they pay for fuel is what the consumer pays. And at one point under the Biden administration, we usually change that factor once a year. At the end of each year, we try to make it the factor so it'll be 0 the next year, and we try to even it up. Well, in 1 year, we had to change the factor 2 times, and we were $690 million not recovered, in the red, meaning that as a commission, we had to find a way for Alabama Power Company to make that up. Now, that's solely on the Biden-Harris administration.
Sure.
I mean, and so that is one of the reasons when you look at every kilowatt hour you use, about 3 cents of that, really it's, about 3 cents of that. But if you look at an average bill, about $30 of that was going towards fuel. Now, good news is we've about pulled that back down now. And I believe, I'm just one commissioner, and I don't ever want to say it's going to happen, but I believe that you're going to see a major decrease in that at our next commission meeting, which is in November, because we have now recovered that, and it looks like, it's time to give people some relief.
Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Yes. And believe me, we want to do that.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating to me to see what's happening in Washington and to know that we can't do anything about it except get them out of there.
Yeah. It affects so much. And then, so I guess that was a great answer. And then the one thing, and so the other thing that I just get browbeat constantly with is there hasn't been a rate audit in Alabama in 20 years. What I don't even know. Do you guys do rate audits? Is that part of what you guys do?
We do them every day, but we actually have like a 3-year deal where we look at them in depth and we change it. So when they say that, that's absolutely not true. When I ran for president, the one thing I promised is that we would bring all the major companies we regulated in and have hearings, which we did. And that was in 2013. We held hearings and we lowered the rate for every company we regulate. And that's their allowed return.
Okay.
But what they want, what the environmentalists want, is they want to come in and play commissioner. They want to come in and tell us what to do.
Sure.
Now, we gave everyone an opportunity to speak. I mean, all you had to do was say you were an Alabama citizen, an Alabama power customer, Alabama Gas Company, Alabama, back then it was Alabama, or Mobile Gas Company, any of those companies. If you were a customer and you put your name on the list, you could come ask questions, you could give your point of view and all. But the reality is what they want us to do is hand over all the proprietary information of all the companies we regulate so that then they can look at everything. Well, that's the reason you have a commissioner. You have a commissioner so that the commissioners can keep things that a company needs to be proprietary.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, again, like I said, I'm learning with my audience as I ask these questions. I don't know. So,
well, it's if you look at this, in fact, our first hearings, we were able to trace it to very liberal groups from California, but at the time we couldn't. And they spent over $1 million advertising during these hearings, and they would bring in busloads and they would, advertise against very ugly messages against us. But the reality is, no matter what happens, I have to realize that my job is to look after the people who elected me. My job is to be their voice.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if they're throwing tomatoes or stones or saying bad things. What I've got to do is look at it and always do what I believe is right.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done. In fact, you can look at the fact since 2010, Alabama Power Company has only had 4 times where they were allowed to increase their budget.
Yeah.
4 times at 15%.
Yeah.
Now, that is, you can't find many things at this point. At this point, the last time that they had any increase was 2021. And the reason why, they don't want to raise it either. I mean, believe it or not, they're only allowed to make a certain profit.
Yeah.
We have not changed that up at all. It's only come down under, I guess, my administration.
Sure.
And so they want to do a good job and charge less too, because it makes people happier, their customers happier.
And that's the whole idea of a regulated monopoly is, that you have to be there to hold them accountable and make sure it's not, I think something you said came up, you meant kind of environmentalists are wanting the proprietary information, and that is always the challenge that I think as conservatives that we fall into is like, look, environmentalists are communist, Marxist people because of the way that they go after protecting the environment is wrong. They're not really concerned. Global warming, I would say, is a myth, and they're using that myth in order to gain control and power. It's not because they're actually concerned about the environment. And because we as conservatives know that, we look at environmentalists as lunatic Marxists that are our enemies. But the flip side that can then happen as Christians is I think we can forget that we actually do have a responsibility to maintain the environment that God gave us. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think like everything else the Marxists do is they're taking advantage of that thing inside of us that knows we have to take care of this earth that God has given us. On that note, another thing that I think people were really surprised that 1819 covered, because we are they call us the alt-right, far-right extremist news outlet, which just means we tell the truth, which is alt-right and far-right extreme now. Is that we cover the coal ash cleanup stuff that's going on and all the different. But what's been really interesting is because I travel over the state, as I'm sure you do as well, and I talk to people all the time. And it's interesting the things they don't talk about that are always a thing, like gambling. You hear that? Like no one's ever told me they want to gambling, but that's always a priority. That's neither here nor there. But the one thing I do hear often, specifically when I'm in Lower Alabama, is conservatives, diehard conservatives that are talking about the coal ash cleanup and that whole situation and scenario. What role does the Public Service Commission play in that, if any?
Well, actually, it's ADEM, the Department of Environmental Management here in Alabama, that works with the EPA to come up with these rules and agreements and then enforce them with Alabama Power Company. This one has been a little more all over the map because I believe it was 2016 is when this first started, and the ADEM group actually held hearings. I believe it was 2019, 2020. I might have a year wrong. Yeah. They held hearings at ADEM and decided that you could make a choice. Do you want to cap it in place, the coal ash in the two ponds, or do you want to? And what you do is you push it all into cute little blocks, and obviously make sure that none of them can get out, and you seal it, and so it makes it environmentally safe. The second choice was you take all of that coal ash, you load it onto a train or a truck, mostly a train though, and you haul it somewhere else. Well, then you've got the problem of who wants it. That's always a problem. And then what happens if you have a situation like in West Virginia and, there's a derailment, which we actually get all the paperwork on all the derailments in the state. Yeah. And I can assure you derailments are not an unusual phenomenon in our state. Yeah. And so to me, capping in place made sense. It made sense to ADEM. But the reality is our federal government, once again, said capping in place, nope, we're not going to agree to that. So they've come back and said no, but there has not been a complete agreement yet about what will happen or where it will go. And so that's being worked on now. You are so right. I believe in a clean environment. But if you look at what it is now that these environmentalists are complaining about, usually what they're trying to do is mandate solar because they've got a lot of money coming from the solar groups. And I don't think there's anything wrong with solar. I've actually voted for some solar for Alabama Power Company. But the reality is it's never going to take the place unless they change everything with fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I'll just emphatically state I don't want solar. I want all the nuclear, coal, and oil and gas that I can get. Full stop.
Well,
like
it's
that, like,
cheaper and it burns warmer and it's more compact. You don't have it over all of our land that should be growing vegetables and fruit.
And so I believe that the play to move towards these other alternate means are, there's a whole play. It's a power play. It's a play so that that other people than conservatives and normal Americans can get the power. I believe that 110%. And like I said, it's just that one area now is they're crazy and they're trying to use environmentalism to steal power. Okay. However, we still have to, because I wouldn't even call the guy that I deal with an environmentalist. He runs a group that's been very pivotal in kind of bringing to light the dangers of the capping. Like if we cap it, here's what could still happen. Here's what could still seep into the bay or seep into the water or seep into whatever. And so those are the kind of concerns that I think need to be dealt with. And I don't think he's pushing for solar. I can ask him. I can find out. I don't think that's the case. I think he really is genuinely concerned, as well as a whole bunch of conservative friends that I have down there in Fairhope and down on the bay, is that there's going to be, if we cap it and we go with what was decided with ADEM and the capping, that there's still going to be a possibility for seepage to get into the bay and get into everything else.
And really, Bryan, I'm going to have to leave that to ADEM.
Yeah.
That's not where my expertise lies. And whatever ADEM says, I tend to believe over the EPA because I've watched all of the bad rulings.
Yeah.
They are like a political arm of the White House.
Sure.
And
100%.
so I really think whatever ADEM's doing, Alabama Department of Environmental Management under Lance LaFleur does a great job. He has a lot of open hearings. He's very transparent. And we happen to be, for a disclaimer, in the same Sunday school class. I think he's a great guy.
Well, tell him he needs to come on the podcast.
He does.
Yes.
And, but you know what he is? He's a chemical engineer from, I believe, Georgia Tech. He does a great job. He's smart as a whip. And he doesn't have an agenda. He wants to do what's right for our state. And you don't want to make it so difficult that you cannot own a business in the state or grow a business or provide jobs for people. But you also want to make sure that families and children are safe in our state. And I think he does a great job. But so I don't really have an opinion on that one. But what I am very, I guess, leery of is the fact that I've watched EPA try to put punitive damages on us here in Alabama because they know we're a red state. They know we like our coal. We like to get our electricity through burning coal and fossil fuels like natural gas. And so they've been pretty hard on us. And what that does is you see that in bills. It is directly impacting the bills in our state. And that's what frustrates me. When I talk to these people or when I've testified before the EPA, and what I say is, look, understand a clean environment, but when you're talking about this green religion you have, we're just not all in that in Alabama. Only green we're concerned about is keeping some green left in our pocket. And, we need our dollar bills for food. It's gone up so much, and other things. It doesn't need to be higher energy prices. And that's what Washington wants for our state.
Awesome. That's great. Any last words before we close?
Keep up your conservative talk because, folks, we're in the election cycle of probably our lifetime. And we have got to get everyone to the polls. Donald Trump, I hope you'll vote for Trump for president of the United States and then Twinkle for president of the PSC. But the reality is, this is a pivotal moment for us as conservatives. But it's really, do you believe in the American dream for your children and your grandchildren? And my heart cries for them. I truly believe Trump is standing with Israel, and that's what God's word tells us to do. And I hope and pray, and I hope you'll join me in praying because this is just that election that is so pivotal. And do anything you can. Lace up your tennis shoes like I did and walk door to door, get your neighbors out, vote early. That's allowed now, but do whatever it takes to make sure you get your parents, your grandparents, your children and their friends in college. In fact, my freshman roommate in college, her mother got us absentee ballots to vote for Ronald Reagan's re-election in 1984. Wow. I'll never forget Miss Godwin for doing that. And I think that really made an impression on me. I've never missed voting since then.
Man, I was born in 1984.
I'm old.
Well, Twinkle Cavanaugh, thank you so much for your time and coming in.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in again. That will wrap it up for this week. Until next time, put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.